Prime Minister Orpo, Madam Ambassador, Professor Aghion, dear guests here in Korjaamo in Helsinki and online, good morning and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kirsi Heikkel. I'm Helsinki Bureau Chief for Bloomberg News and I'm your host today. The Economic Council of Finland, chaired by the Prime Minister, brings together the government, the Bank of Finland, and the key stakeholders to discuss issues central to Finland's economic future. And once in every government term, the Council hosts or organizes a high-level seminar on a timely topic. And that's why we're here today. And this time, the topic is economic growth, something we all know that Finland truly needs. We'll hear shortly remarks from the Prime Minister, Nobel Prize-winning economist Philippe Aghion, and two expert commentators, Petta Sarlin and Pia Santavirta. And we have also left some room for your questions and comments. So, it is my pleasure to invite Prime Minister Petteri Orpo to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Petteri Orpo.
Esteemed Nobel laureate in economics, Professor Philippe Aghion, honored guests. First, I would like to thank you, Professor Aghion, for our fruitful discussion, short discussion in Kesäranta in the morning. Now I know exactly what to do next. So it's a pleasure to open this conference. History is full of turning points, and we are living through one right now. It is time of disruption. Our ability to see both the risks and the opportunities helps us navigate it. I hope that today in the speeches and discussions we will focus more on the opportunities, on how we can create growth even in uncertain times. But let me first say a few words about the current situation and the risk we face. Great power politics has made a forceful return. So forceful that many say the old world order is gone. Russia waged a brutal war in Ukraine for the 5th year. Ukraine suffers the most, but the war affects the whole of Europe. It has had a particular impact on Finland and our economy. Russia will remain a long-term threat to Finland and to all of Europe. Instability in the Middle East shows up quickly in the global economy. It shakes stock markets and raises energy prices. Consumer uncertainty grows. And at the same time, as Europe has signed trade agreements, that open markets in Mercosur, India and Australia, we have also lived with the threat of the trade war. And Finland has its own challenges: zero growth for years, dangerous amount of debt, and the way our population is developing means that our health and care costs will grow by billions in the year ahead. We are also living in the time of technological disruption. AI is already changing societies and will continue to change them in ways we cannot fully predict. Quantum computing, with the ability to handle huge amounts of data, may help us solve some of humanity's tricky problems. AI improves productivity and frees people from time-consuming routine tasks. But AI also brings concerns. It will replace some tasks. Many people worry that their skills are already falling behind. So, what should we do in this time of disruption? Our ability to influence the international situation is limited. That is why we must focus on what is in our own hands. We must see the opportunities we have and make full use of them. This point brings us to Finland. Let us look for a moment where we now stand. You all know the economic situation this government faced when we began our work. For 2.5 years, we have taken determined steps to fix the foundations of our economy and get growth moving again. We have done this during a time that has not made the task easy. To stabilize the debt ratio, the government has agreed the measures worth around 10 billion euros to improve public finances. We have carried out major structural reforms to improve Finland's competitiveness, reforms that should have been done 20 years ago. We have made the labor market more flexible and reformed social security to make work pay. We have updated the tax system to support work and self-employment. Competitive taxation will ensure that skilled people want to build their careers in Finland. With all these measures, this government has aimed at growth. We have made decisions on growth measures both in government program and at every government budget session. A year ago in autumn, under the leadership of Risto Murto, we launched a new growth initiative. It was inspiring to see how many organizations offered concrete proposals. Finland's success has always been based on skills and knowledge, and it will remain so. That is why we have strengthened school education, increased the intake of students and doctoral education at universities, and made historic investments in research and development. These investments will bear fruit in long term. We have made permitting processes easier. We have ensured that no investment in Finland is blocked due to lack of energy. We have introduced a tax incentive for large clean energy investments. The list is long. The war in Iran has made it clear that our decision to invest in clean and renewable energy has been the right one. Energy is cheap in Finland and in other European countries that have consistently carried out the energy transition. The problems lie in countries that have held on to fossil fuels. That is why we defend the EU emission trading scheme as a market-based tool. There have been good news. Last year and early this year, we have seen many reports of large investments across different sectors. Last year alone, 8 billion euros worth of green transition investments were completed, and new projects worth 24 billion euros have launched. Finnish startups raised record levels of funding last year. Congratulations. The government has not yet reached all its goals. Growth is not yet at the level our national economy needs. Unemployment is still too high. But we have done right things. This has been recognized by European Commission, credit rating agencies, and many, many experts. The biggest factors holding back growth come from outside Finland. Putin's war and Trump's policies have slowed growth, but the government continues making necessary decisions. We are preparing at full speed for April session on spending limits. And we are looking for ways to further improve growth and employment and boost household confidence so that Finnish people would start using the savings now sitting in bank accounts. This is what our economy needs. Honored guests, dear audience, I will end by looking to the future. I want to focus on 3 questions that we must, in my view, solve next. First, the size of public sector. Finland's public sector is one of the biggest among developed countries. I believe that during the next electoral term, Finland should aim to bring the size of public sector closer to the level of our partners, our peers, Sweden and Denmark. We must ensure that in small country, the private sector has the opportunities and space it needs to grow. We cannot fix the size of the public sector with small, across-the-board cuts. We need to do things better. For example, our neighbor Estonia has decided to use AI across society, from industry to healthcare, and from transport to public administration. Estonia aims to double labor productivity by 2035 and achieve 25% economic growth in 5 years. We must do the same. Second, Finland must become a world-class platform for growth for technology companies. If we manage to build the progress we already have, we will create a positive cycle. Innovative, ambitious companies attract talent, build ecosystems, and create wealth. Finland has already shown with the Lumi supercomputer and the upcoming Lumi AI factory that we can offer a cost-effective and energy-efficient environment for high-performance computing and AI development. In a country that leads in AI skills are also a basic civic skill that belongs to everyone. As a society, we must invest in this. We must turn AI from a source of worry into an asset. And third, we must make full use of what we already have. Clean nature, clean air, clean food. These are things the world wants more than ever. The clean transition gives us a great opportunity to benefit from the current wave of investments. The move away from fossil fuels will continue. The switch to using electricity in advancing while demand for computing power is growing rapidly. Finland has critical minerals, industrial expertise, and affordable electricity for investors. Finland has vast potential for growth. When we make full use of it, our future brings bright. I look forward to hearing the thoughts of our keynote speaker, our commentators, and all of you on how we can create growth in a time of disruption. So let's begin. The conference is open. Thank you so much.
Stay there. Thank you so much for your remarks, Prime Minister. I understood that we might have a time for one question, right?
Yes.
Good.
Yes, we have.
And you mentioned AI, and we're going to be talking more about it today, how we chase growth with the help of AI. But I'd like to ask you about some of the tough news Finland got this week. The Bank of Finland already cut its economic forecast due to Iran war and sees the inflation to rise. We have Governor Olli Rehn here in the audience. Good morning. And the unemployment rate is very high. It climbed to 10.9, the highest in the EU, and the trend rate stands at 10.5. So Finland, perhaps one can say, is in a vicious cycle of all this geopolitics, what you also spoke about, weak confidence, also government's austerity measures, and high unemployment. So your best I don't want to say guess, but what would you say that what will break this cycle?
Thank you. Very easy question.
Yeah. I know there aren't answers, but
maybe the biggest reasons why we are suffering and our economy is suffering comes from Russia, Russian aggression in Ukraine. All the effects to the European security and economy, it's clear. And also the uncertainty of President Trump's politics. But I think that at this very difficult time, the government, we have done what is in our own hands. As I mentioned in my speech, we have reformed our society, our economy, labor markets, taxation, permitting processes, and so on. We have fixed our competitiveness. And now we have to create trust in homeland economics. Our export is doing quite well, but at the same time, I have to say that I'm very. It is disappointment that at the beginning this year, economy start to grow, and now we have war in Middle East, in Iran, and again,
the hope is gone.
No, there's always hope. There's always hope, and let's make it happen. Thank you.
I think that's a good message. We try to create hope and hope. But thank you so much for being here and for your remarks.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Kiitos. Dear guests, 3 academics received the 2025 Nobel Prize in Economics for their work on identifying what drives growth. And one of them is Professor Philippe Aghion of the London School of Economics and INSEAD, one of Europe's leading business schools. Professor Aghion has also been a key architect of President Emmanuel Macron's economic policy, including pension reform proposal. He has a powerful message for us today and also for the whole Europe. Our continent, Europe, has been a sleeping beauty for decades, and it is time to wake up. Please, let's give a big hand to Professor Aghion. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yes.
So I
The
go there and I
stage is
come
yours.
back and then
We'll have some conversation
Okay,
then.
excellent.
The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So always intimidated to be when I start talking. Great, such a distinguished audience, and it was a great honor, Prime Minister, to exchange with you this morning, and it's great to be here. So I'll talk a bit about my own approach to economic growth and to try to feed into the conversation what could be done in various European countries who want to, reverse trend and initiate a true catch-up with more advanced, with the US and China, more innovating economies than we are. So here is a picture of young Schumpeter. Schumpeter is a great renowned Austrian economist who had a very interesting life. I don't want to go into all the aspects of Schumpeter's life. It's not my topic. But he has been finance minister, I think, in Austria, and ended up being a professor at Harvard. And Schumpeter is known to have coined the term creative destruction, by which he meant the process whereby new innovation displace old technologies. New innovations make old technologies become obsolete. In my students' days, the leading growth model was the neoclassical model, the Solow model. And I came to know well Robert Solow. He was a wonderful man. And he had written a very elegant growth model. But the Solow's model was essentially revolving around capital accumulation. So it was a very simple model where you produce consumer goods with capital stock, and then you use part of your production to save and invest in increasing your capital stock, and that's how you generate growth. But Solow himself was aware of the fact that there are decreasing returns to capital accumulation. You increase production much more when you move from 0 machine to 1 machine than when you move from 9 machine to 10 machine. So if you rely on capital accumulation alone, you cannot grow forever. You need something else, and the something else, Solow would call it technical progress. But Solow would not tell you where technical progress was coming from. There was the famous Solow residual. And so with Peter Howitt, whom I met at MIT in 1987, he was my first year as an assistant professor, and Peter was a one-year visitor from Western Ontario. I came to Peter and I said, look, Peter, why don't we try from scratch to write a new growth model where at the heart of it it would be innovation and the creative destruction process. Because when in my students' days, there was no such thing as a Schumpeterian growth model. Schumpeter was a curiosity. You would learn Schumpeter, you would hear about Schumpeter in a course on history of economic thought, or you would learn about Schumpeter in a course on, I.O., but it would be a curiosity, with the mundanity, you see, but it would not be mainstream. So what we did with Howitt was to build a new growth paradigm revolving around three main ideas. The first idea is that long-run growth is driven by a cumulative process of innovation where each innovator builds upon previous innovations. You always stand on giant shoulders. The second idea is that innovation do not come from heaven. They are generated mainly by entrepreneurs. You remember the joke with George W. Bush that the French didn't have a word for entrepreneur. You remember that joke? Yeah. Half of English is French, the other half is German. You know that. The innovations are generated by entrepreneurs who pursue innovations, who invest in R&D, because they hope to get monopoly rents. When I innovate, I create a new product or a cheaper way to produce, and I get rents for a while until I'm being superseded by subsequent innovators, okay? And the third idea is creative destruction. New innovation displace old technologies. And at the heart of the growth process, there is a contradiction. On the one hand, you need the monopoly rents to motivate innovation activities. But on the other hand, yesterday's innovators are tempted to use their rents to prevent new innovations because they don't want themselves to be subject to creative destruction. And regulating a market economy is always about how to manage this contradiction. I want to let Nokia grow and become big, but I want to make sure that when Nokia is big, it won't prevent new firms to come in and also come in. So growth is about a process where constantly you have new talents coming in. You want them to be able to innovate and grow, but make sure that once they've grown, they don't prevent subsequent generations of talents to come in. And that's where competition policy is so important. Okay? Another idea is that you need competition to make sure that all the time newcomers come in. There is something also about competition. I always tell the story in the following way. You are a classroom. You are all equally good, but suppose that there is the top of the class and the bottom half of the class. And suppose I open the door and I let a good student, a good element into the class. What will happen? The top of the class will work harder to remain the top of the class. And the bottom of the class will tend to be discouraged. So the top of the class will innovate to escape the competition with a newcomer, and the bottom will be discouraged. It's exactly the same with firms. The blue line represents firms that are close to the technological frontier in their sector. They react to more competition by innovating more and growing more. The orange line are firms that are far below the frontier in their sector. They tend to be discouraged. But the more developed a country is, the more blue firms there is compared to orange firms. So competition overall is more growth enhancing in more developed countries because the more developed countries rely on frontier innovation to grow. You see, and that's an important idea there, okay? Now, there are various things you can do with this paradigm that we elaborated with Peter Howitt. First, you can revisit some main enigma in economic history. The second thing is that you can rethink the future of capitalism. And then I will talk about should we fear AI, okay? And so historical enigma, I will mention two of them. Secular stagnation. Secular stagnation is an old debate with Robert Gordon, Chad Jones, that Robert Gordon had the view that, the great ideas, we found them. You had a big industrial revolution, which was, the steam engine. Then you had the electricity in the 19th century. Then you had the electricity revolution in the 1900s. And then you had IT. And Bob Gordon's view was that it's like a fruit tree. You got the good fruits in the 19th century, and then we decline. And I think now with AI, he's revising his belief. So one way to look at secular stagnation is to believe that ideas are harder to find. I don't believe that ideas are harder to find. All the time we keep having new ideas. Within any particular field, ideas eventually become harder to find. But we reset the clock all the time. So that's my view. But also by secular stagnation, we mean the fact that it's the enigma that, you know, I don't have a pointer there, but that's no problem. That's no problem. You see, if you look at the average TFP growth rate in the US, you see that growth went up a lot, 95, 2005, was the Nokia years, no? And then growth declines a lot. And the question is, why is it that growth declined? And it's very much true in IT producing sectors, the black line, and in IT using sectors, the gray line. In fact, what happened is when you had the IT revolution in the US, you had the emergence of superstar firms, Google, Microsoft, Amazon. They first boosted, they knew how to harness the power of IT better than others. So they first pushed the growth. But then what happened is that they expanded, and they expanded so much through merger and acquisition that eventually they ended up discouraging new firms. That's very Schumpeterian. You see, I mean, they initially boosted growth in the US, but then because they expanded so much, they ended up discouraging. And how do we know they expanded? Because you see, if you look at all sectors of the US economy, concentration, which is the share of sales of the 4 biggest firms, increased very fast during the 1990s. And if you look at the number of establishments, it is these large firms that increase the most the number of establishments. So the competition policy did not adapt to the IT revolution. We should have prevented them from expanding so much, because the result of expanding too much is that at the end of the day, entry of new firms went down in the US. You see what I mean? So the secular stagnation is very much what happened, is that we let some firms grow too much, and at the end of the day, they inhibited the entry of new firms. It's as if Nokia had prevented new firms to enter. I don't know if that's the case. I love Nokia, but I don't know if in Finland the same happened, that some firms become so big that they end up discouraging new firms, okay? So you have always to see to always make sure that the talented can grow, but make sure that this does not prevent new firms from coming in. I think that's, and the secular stagnation. So if you were to adapt competition policy and reform it in the US, you would have the growth resuming much more, okay? So that's the secular stagnation. I want to talk about middle income trap, because that's a lot about your fear, Prime Minister, about Finland, and we have the same fear about France. I call that middle income trap. Let me show you a picture. Since we are close to the Russia, here is a picture of Soviet Union, okay, and Russia. So look at this. You see that if you look at per capita GDP growth in Russia, you see up to 1975, it was even faster than the US. And then they stopped growing. So what happened is, in fact, a lot of the growth in Russia was capital accumulation, exactly the solo model. Okay, and to some extent imitation. They had some innovation, but I remember they imitated the Concorde with Tupolev 144, and in Le Bourget I had Tupolev 144 almost falling on my head. So okay, so and we see the limits of imitation. So the thing is, the only equation I will show, but don't be afraid of equations. This tells you that there are 2 ways to grow from 80 to 80 plus 1. One way is to go from 80 to 80 bar. I call that imitation. So one way to grow is to imitate more advanced technologies, to imitate more advanced countries. The other way to grow is the mu n gamma minus 180. You go from A to gamma A. That means that you improve upon yourself. When you are very far below the technological frontier, it's catching up. You grow by catching up. But it's not the same policies that encourage catching up growth and the policies that encourage frontier innovation. We already saw that competition is particularly important when you are in the business of frontier innovation. And you see, let me now show you Korea. Or let me keep going. Here is South Korea. if I were to show North Korea, the electrocardiogram would be flat, obviously. Okay, so that's South Korea. That's the GDP per capita growth rate after the Korean War. You see, they grow very fast, and then the growth declines. Alors, the growth declines partly because they catch up with the frontier. When you are very much below the frontier, catching up with the frontier gives you a lot of growth. When you get closer, you grow less. But something else happened in Korea. And in Korea, during the catching up phase, you had the emergence of conglomerate. They call them chaebols. The chaebols, not only they discourage entry of non-chaebols, but they put pressure on the Korean government not to move away from policies that were good for catching up, the mu-M, to policies that are good for frontier innovation, to mu-N in particular. They didn't want competition. When you are a big conglomerate, the last thing you want is competition. So they delayed going from imitation-enhancing policy to innovation-enhancing policy. And that put Korea in a middle-income trap. It took the crisis of the late 90s in Korea to weaken the power of the chaebols that allowed non-chaebols to enter and forced the current government to finally implement competition policy. You see? So there is a good thing to a crisis. The same happened in Japan. Japan was a fast-growing country between 1945 and 1990, okay? And there, same thing, imitation-based growth. They had the emergence of the keiretsus. The keiretsus are the big Japanese conglomerates. They are the equivalent of the chaebols in Korea. And these keiretsus, not only they discourage non-keiretsu firms to enter, but they put pressure on the Japanese government not to move towards more trade, openness, and more competition. And that's why now Japan is stuck. And it's an old country of old firms, you see what I mean? And that's where they are stuck. So they are subject. But now I come to Europe. And now here is Europe, you see, and now we come to exactly what you are mentioning. So don't feel bad about Finland, because you are the best of us all, okay? I'm coming from France to tell you how good you are. So, you see, here you see the per capita GDP of the Eurozone compared to the US, okay? I put the US at 1 and I compare the per capita GDP. Of course, what you see is that, Peter, I don't have, it's a PT, I don't have a pointer. You don't have a, no problem. I have to jump a bit. Let me jump. Here, boom. That's the Second World War for you. Of course, with the Second World War, we destroy a lot of capital stock in Europe, and that's why we have this kind of, downward peak, okay? But then starting in 1945, you can see that Europe is, the per capita GDP of the Eurozone is catching up partly with the US up to the late 80s. But then since the 80s, we are declining again. So what happened is that between 1945 and the 80s, we rebuild our capital stock thanks to the Marshall Plan in big part. And we also, because we have a good education level, we are not as good as Finland, which has the best education system of us all. We are able to catch up with the technological revolutions that took place in the 1920s, 1930s in the US, the electricity and combustion engine. So we are catching up. But then, you see, when it comes to do frontier innovation, the US, they introduce IT, and we failed to fully take advantage of IT. You did better than everybody else with Nokia, okay? But we were not like Nokia, okay? And we don't, and we decline. And what happened is that the US, they move into breakthrough frontier, and Europe remains stuck in incremental mid-tech mostly. Again, you are the exception, okay? So if I look at high technology patents filed dans the high technology patents which are here, you can see Europe is in green, we are declining. And China is in blue, China is emerging. That means we are losing not only to the US, but also to China. Breakthrough innovations are made in China. And the drama is that if you look at the research that underlies the breakthrough innovations, it's done a lot in Europe. We do the research, despite the fact research is underfunded in Europe. We could do much more to fund basic research. But if you look at the papers that are cited by patents in disruptive technologies, which you have blockchain, computer vision, genome editing, hydrogen storage, you see that the big chunk is in Europe. So that means in Europe, we do the basic research that leads to breakthrough innovation, but the breakthrough innovation is done elsewhere, in the US or in China. And that's what has to change, and that's where Draghi comes in, okay? And, okay, again, another thing that is very interesting. If you look at the 5 most innovating firms in Europe and the US today versus in 2000, you can see that in the US, apart from Qualcomm, they are all different. They are not the same firms. They changed. Ah, I'm losing you. You are there. So you see that the firms are not the same. Look at the 5 top innovating firms in the US nowadays, and apart from Qualcomm, they are not the same firm. In Europe, they are the same. Because what happened is that in the US, you move from mid-tech to high-tech, and in Europe, you kept doing the same things by the same people. And that's the problem we have, okay? And that's where you have the Draghi agenda. What is the Draghi agenda? We don't have a true single market for goods and services because you have the gold plating practice. Each country in Europe has its own regulation to the European regulation. I know I'm late?
No, I have a pointer for you.
Oh, this is wonderful.
Just here.
Oh,
But you
okay.
can't use
And I use the other one for tea clicker. And oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, yes. Oh la la. Okay, okay. Excellent. So you don't have a true single market for goods and services. We don't have a true capital market. We should have a unified capital market. We don't. The other thing we don't have is that, you know, institutional investors, you know, the big thing, why do they get breakthrough innovation in the US? Because failure is not punished. You encourage failure. If you fail, it's because you tried. Failing in basic research, you need long-term funding of basic research. ERC has only 5-year grants. I would like them, ERC, to fund excellence laboratories for 10-year period. Then people will take much more risk in basic research. So we need much more funding, long-term funding of research. So anything you could do here to create laboratoire d'excellence, that's the one thing we did in France that worked. You know, when there is one thing in France that works, I say that's the one thing. There are many things. Crédit impôt recherche is bullshit. There are many things that are very bad. But the LabEx, the laboratoire d'excellence, worked very well. So it boosted breakthrough innovation in industries nearby the LabEx. LabEx is international jury funding a laboratory for 10-year period. Fantastic results. Do the same. LabEx, try to do the laboratoire d'excellence. So that's one thing, research. When you are a startup, venture capital is important. It's underdeveloped in Europe. Okay? The third thing, if you want to encourage breakthrough innovation in larger firms, you need institutional investors. Prime Minister, you told me that there you are doing. And Sweden is also. But you are the only ones in Europe developing institutional investors. The other European countries are very much underdeveloped. And we need the DARPA, Defense Advanced Project Agency. It's a new way to do industrial policy. The problem in Europe is that in the name of competition policy, we precluded any form of sectoral state aid. That's a big mistake. The US, they do competition and industrial policy. China, in its own way, does competition because they always lend to several firms and they have industrial policy. And in Europe, in the name of competition policy, we precluded industrial policy. That was a huge mistake in defense and AI. In green transition, in biotech, we badly need our DARPA. We don't have anything in Europe approaching a DARPA. The European Innovation Council is not a DARPA. There's been a beautiful report by, you know, Toulouse and Bocconi showing that we don't have a DARPA in Europe. DARPA, it's a mixture of top-down and bottom-up. For example, in defense and space in the 50s, the mission was to put a man in space because the Russians had put Gagarin. We looked stupid. So the basic research had been done. You needed to go to implementation. Money comes from your ministry. You have team leaders, and then the team leaders elicit competing projects. So DARPA, it's a pro-competition way to do industrial policy, because you have the team leader who comes from academia or industry. He or she has money, and she can elicit competing projects. And that's what they did with DARPA. So it's a pro-entry, pro-competition way to do industrial policy. And that's how you got the GPS, autonomous navigation, internet. All those owe a lot to DARPA. You know why we're all here to the RNA messenger vaccines? It was the BARDA. It's the equivalent of DARPA for bio in the US, Biomedical Advanced Research Development Authority. Same thing. They asked Moncef Slaoui to say, look, elicit many labs to produce vaccines on RNA messenger. And they were competing labs. And that's how we got out of the COVID. Okay? We don't have anything like that in Europe. So you see, there is a whole ecosystem of innovation that we need to have in Europe. And my way, we are talking, Prime Minister, this morning, I don't believe it will happen at EU level. It will be coalition of the willing. France, Finland, Germany, others who want to join us, we should work together, have joint single market for high tech, have joint DARPA. You have institutional investors, let's join your institutional investors. And that's how I think we will implement the Draghi. And I believe very much in a coalition of the willing approach to implement Draghi. Voilà, that's what it takes. That's why I wanted to talk about middle income tax syndrome. But it's also Europe is involved there. And there are a lot we can do. And you know why I believe Europe can win? Because we have things that the US no longer have. We have democracy and freedom. We have the social model they don't have. And for AI, more than ever, you need good social model, good labor market system, okay? And we have a commitment to climate. And that will attract a lot. You know, Yann Lequin left Meta. He wants to create a new AI wave in Europe because he's attracted by the soft power we have. We have fantastic engineers, fantastic mathematicians and researchers. I told you about the research in Europe. We have this soft power. We have everything to be the attractive force. So I believe that we have to get on with it. And it's a fantastic opportunity. In fact, we should thank Trump and Putin in us. I don't say that, but I mean, they force us. There are two wake-up calls. Just do it. Just get together and get out and make Europe again the leading innovator worldwide. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say on this. Now I make sure. I want to say a few things on rethink capitalism, and I talk about AI. The US has a very bad social model. Nobody wants to do. You don't want to be poor and unhealthy in the US. And Europe, we don't do as well as the US on innovation. If you look at the Gini index, which measures a global measure of inequality, how globally you depart from perfect equality, you see that I didn't put Finland there, but you see Finland would be in the same ballpark as Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, I'm sure. US has more inequality than you have, of course, it's obvious. They have a higher poverty rate than you have. And you know, also the dramatic thing that happened in the US is what my colleague Angus Deaton and Anne Case showed. You know, it's the death of despair. It's the death rate of unskilled middle age. You see that in the US, the death rate of unskilled middle age has risen sharply since 2000. Those are people that fear to lose their job, because when you lose your job in the US, you lose access to health. And you lose many things, and your life becomes even more miserable. And people are so scared that they start taking opioids, sleeping pills, and that's why the death rate has increased. If you look at Germany and France, you see the death rate has gone down. And of course, if I had to put Finland, obviously the death rate of unskilled middle age has gone down. And that, I think, kills, you know, disqualifies the US as a social model. They don't know how to deal with people who are in distress, who lose their job. Okay, so on the social, they are not good. But on the other hand, when it comes to innovation, here I look at triadic patents, the patents that are registered in US Patent Office, Japanese and European Patent Office are the good patents. You see, and there I'm speaking in front of Otto, who is a leading innovation economist worldwide, and he is in front of me, so I'm always intimidated when I have Otto there. Okay, US is above everybody. So you see what we want to do, we want to combine the good side of the American model to be more innovative with the good side of the European model, particularly the Scandinavian model, to be more protective and inclusive. Some people believe it's an either or. I believe there are policies that can make us more innovative and more inclusive. One of them is flex security. In Denmark, when you lose your job, for 2 years, you get 90% of your salary, the state, up to a certain level of salary, of course, and the state retrains you and helps you find a new job. And that makes creative destruction work better, but it also makes you more protective. My colleague Alexandra Roulet, she looked at the evolution of health of a worker in Denmark who loses her job because her firm closes down, to the health of a similar worker in age, experience, and education in a firm that does not close down. You see, it's a difference in difference, okay? Before, after, the one who loses the job loses the job, between the two, the treatment group with the worker that loses her job, and the control group, the worker that do not. You see no effect on purchase inventory anxieties. In Denmark, no problem. Now you look at the effect. You look at the effect on probability to have a heart attack, zero effect. Mortality, zero effect. So they found something. And you know now everybody worldwide, I talk to the Chinese, I talk to many countries worldwide, they want to emulate your labor market system. So I don't know how different you are from the FlexSec in Denmark. We should discuss that. But you are much closer to than we are and that everybody else is. More than ever with AI, we will need a system like this. And you are well ahead of the Americans on that. Their big problem will be that they don't know how to cope with those who lose their job. Okay, so flex security, why is it good? Because it makes, is exactly what you try to do, Prime Minister. You try to give more flexibility, but you have the flexibility because you have also the security. You have flex-sec, you see what I mean? You have flexibility on the enterprise side, but you have security on the employee side. The combination of the two and the retraining, that makes creative destruction work better, so you become more innovative, but you also are more protective. And you are there. You see, that's something, you are well ahead of the US on this. Okay, the second thing is education. Now that's always the figure I prefer to present, again, in front of my co-author. Here I represent the probability of innovating as a function of your parental income. You can see that in the US, you are much more likely to innovate if your parents are in the top income. That's on US current data by Bell, Shetty, Jaravel, Petkov, and Drinan. This is on historical US data. I was surprised with Otto and Ari and Ufuk to see that we were the same in Finland. I would have thought in Finland it would be a flat curve, because in Finland, as far as I know, education is totally free and of very high quality. You have among the best PISA tests worldwide. So how come? And we tried to solve this enigma, but then, Otto, please, if I say something wrong, raise your hand and come and rescue me, okay? We said, well, you know what happened is that the higher earning parents are also the more educated parents. So what they do is that they transmit knowledge and aspiration to their children. So if you control for parental education, you see that the curve flattens out a lot. But it didn't solve the enigma fully, because I said, if the school is so good in Finland, why should parental education matter at all? And in fact, what we did is that we looked at the reform of 1970. In 1970, I speak under your control, you made education much more broad-based in Finland, isn't it? There was a big reform there. So we compare the probability of inventing a different level of parental income between children who went to school after the reform and children that went to school before the reform. And look at the beauty. That's what the reform did. It lifted the probability of inventing for all those kids there. You know why it's so important? Because we suffer in our countries for lost Einsteins or lost Marie Curie. There are many smart kids. They're all smart, but all very smart kids. They could become inventors, but they didn't have from their family the knowledge and aspirations to become. You do a reform like the Finnish reform of 1970. You become more innovative because many more people can become innovators, and you become more inclusive at the same time, you see? And I think that we should emulate your 1970. You know, I spoke with Nuno Crato. He was education minister in Portugal. And what I told him, he said, why don't you do like Finland? And he did, and it worked. It worked. He just copied your reform. And the PISA test in Portugal went up like this, you see? So you are an example for the world. Only for, oh my God, that's bad. Okay. And finally, competition. I told you that, you know, in the US, the problem of the secular stagnation is that competition was not there. The large superstar firms, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they ended up discouraging entry of new firms. If you reform competition policy in the US and in Europe to make it much more pro-entry, pro-competition, you will boost growth. But also, you know, the nice thing is that creative destruction means that newcomers replaced old firms. So more creative destruction, more entrant innovation increases social mobility. So if you reform competition policy, you will generate more innovation-led growth and more social mobility. So there are three policies: competition, flex security, and education, that will make you more innovative and more inclusive. And I know that you emphasize a lot education, and you're absolutely right. Education is the basis of all innovation policy. That I wanted to say last few words on AI. AI, I think, has enormous growth potential because it increases not only the efficiency in the production of goods and services, but it's much more easy to have new ideas. Very often, new ideas are recombination of old ideas. With AI, you can recombine much more. And in fact, I showed, and I disagree with Daron Acemoglu, with my friend, but we believe that, you know, if you just look at AI automating the production of goods and services, you increase growth by 0.7 percentage points. At how much are you growing now? 0? But you go from 0 to 0.7. That's not bad. For 10 years in a row. Okay, that's what AI will give you. But that's only looking at growth, at AI automating goods and services. For 10 years, I lose always my other pointer. For 10 years, you see, you grow faster and then you go back to before. But I told you that, you know, AI also makes innovation much easier. So it's not the red line that you will have, it's the blue line. So the big hope for your recovery is the AI and quantic revolution. Go as much as you can. And I know you are into defense. What I am in favor is a DARPA that would blend defense, AI, and quantic, and do it with France and Germany. And you put your eggs there, and I guarantee that you will speed up growth. Voilà. And just one sure is that the one obstacle to is the lack of competition. I told you already that for you know, IT, the problem was that the competition policy did not adapt. It's true, AI, you have a problem because the upstream segments of the AI value chain is dominated by three firms, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. You have one big actor, GPU, on the market for graphic process. It's important to have open source, regulate, but not too much, because too many regulations are a barrier to new firms. The Digital Market Act extended to the whole value chain of AI. All those things you need to do, but also build local computing power. That will help newcomers to come. And that's the industrial policy. With France, Germany, and others, build local computing power. So you need the competition policy and smart industrial policy that will build the local computing power, and it will all further. You have the last concern with employment. I just want to say 2 words, but I don't want to bother you with employment. I will say in words, AI, it's true that it will destroy jobs, but there are 2 reasons why AI will create jobs. Firms that adopt AI, they become more productive, therefore more competitive, and therefore the world market demand for their products increases, and that makes them increase employment. So far in France, is the dominating effect. I call that a productivity effect. Don't underplay it. Firms that adopt AI, they become more productive, they have a bigger world market demand, and they will increase employment. The second thing I told you, that AI, you can generate many new ideas. New ideas are new jobs. So your problem, there will be job destruction with AI, but there will be a lot of job creation. And the whole issue is to smooth out the transition from old jobs to new jobs. I am not in favor of the universal income, period. I am in favor that anybody who is either goes through training or job should get a decent income. So you should put in place a system where you tell people, okay, you lose your job, but we will retrain you and help you find new jobs. if you are either on the training or in a job, you have the guarantee of having a decent life. And I think that's the way. So you can call it flexsec, you can call it whatever. More than ever with AI, you will need this kind of system. So if you have a good competition policy, you will harness the growth potential of AI. If you have the combination of a good education system, but you already have it in Finland. In France, I need to say, first become like Finland, but you are already there. And on top of this education system, put a good flex security system, and then you can harness the growth, the job creation potential of AI. So I think you are in very good shape to be leaders on the revolution. You have fantastic engineers, you have the Nokia, you have the education system, you have everything to be a key player in this main source of future growth that AI will be. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Professor. That was amazing. Do you see, Prime Minister said that we need more hope and trust, and you just gave that to us.
You are our model.
Oh.
We want to emulate you.
No, but hey,
Absolutely.
that was truly amazing, wasn't it? It was a great speech. Let's thank him again, Monsieur. Amazing. You can sit down and...
Oh God, you're masochist, you want more of me? Oh my God.
You can sit up, absolutely. And I just introduce our next speaker, and maybe I do it by standing here. So you spoke, we will have more time to talk with you and discuss, and soon you will be talking with Petteri Sarlin, so it's going to be some room for your questions as well. But we have two comments coming up, and the first speaker is Petteri Sarlin. I think that's pretty well done, because you spoke about AI, and he's going to talk about that too. And perhaps he's that kind of innovator you have in mind when you speak about those, what Europe wants and needs. So Petteri Sarlin, as you all probably know, is the co-founder and former CEO of Silo AI, now owned by AMD, which is seen as NVIDIA's closest potential competitor. He is also the founder and chairman of the board of Postscriptum and Foundation PS, which supports long-term AI research to strengthen Europe's competitiveness. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand now to Petteri Sarlin. Hi.
So, thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister, for hosting this forum. Thank you, Professor Aghion, for the very energizing keynote. I am obviously, yes, taking an AI and machine learning perspective, and I'll try to be as energizing. No slides, no pointers. I will take an AI perspective, yes. I do come with a very humble economics background as well. I probably believe more in creative destruction than the neoclassical economism that obviously goes many, many years back. The lack of a belief in part of that was also the reason why I shifted from a PhD in economics to a PhD eventually in machine learning. Probably the closest that I can get to commenting anything related to economics is this anecdote that your chair is coined by the name of an alma mater of the same Finnish university where I had a professorship earlier. So Kurt Björklund, who happens to be a Finn.
You know him?
Yes, of course.
My sponsor is Finnish, so he's all responsible.
So with that, let me say a few words on my take on what it actually takes to turn disruptive technology into growth. And what I do believe and think that we here in Finland need to do differently to succeed at it. I think you've sort of now paved the way for this discussion, so I don't need to repeat the background. We're all concerned, and you referred to Draghi a number of times. I I think, you know, many of the comments and many of the topics covered by the Draghi report are or start to be a little bit of a cliche already. They've been repeated in different forms for the past few years. But I still believe that it's one of the most important policy documents in recent years. And I still believe that the diagnosis of Draghi is correct. Europe has fallen behind, particularly in technology. Now, you can look at data. We saw a lot of data, but I think there are sort of some practical and very descriptive items, and there are these sort of what have been repeated, that all of the plus $1 trillion companies in the world during the past 5 decades have been created in the US and during the past 5 decades. We can also sort of now observe that for a while we had a plus $100 billion company in Europe. Now we don't even have that anymore. So we have not created any plus $100 billion companies in Europe during the past 5 decades. And even more interesting, I think, statistics, if you look at a comparison between the US and Europe, is that if you take out all of the Magnificent Seven out of the statistics in the US, Europe has actually grown faster. So that's where growth is happening today. You know, it's a reality. We don't have the large technology platforms. And part of what was said now, which is also Draghi's core point, Europe fails to commercialize what it researches and invents. And I think that is the right diagnosis, not only for Europe, but also for Finland. Then if we look at this sort of from a very practical perspective as an entrepreneur, as many business leaders in the room as well, I truly believe in ecosystems. And I actually believe that a lot of the growth that has happened in the US is due to that. Silicon Valley is an ecosystem. It happened around Stanford, and around Stanford we eventually then had large companies, venture capital, startups, and a sort of flywheel around that. I think we're seeing glimpse of that in Europe. Paris is a good example of that at the moment, in AI especially. Zurich is doing fairly well. London is also sort of paving the way on that end. And if we look at how that has happened, it has happened around academic talent, Polytechnic in Paris, ETH in Zurich, ICL and UCL in London. And then ultimately, oftentimes, world-class R&D initiatives around that. From time to time, also foreign R&D initiatives, like the big techs, which is a way to basically attract and retain talent and ultimately contribute to the flywheel, where then eventually at some point, French entrepreneurs like Arthur and Timothy will set up companies like Mistral and the many other examples that have happened. I think in Finland we've proven that we can build companies, also AI companies, that are world-class. I will not use Silo as an example of that, but we are seeing companies, especially in deep tech, combining hardware, software, and AI, companies like ISI, IQM, Aura, as examples of that. If we look at our neighbor, Sweden, we're seeing in the AI application layer, Lovable, Legora, Tandem Health, and many others doing well. I do think that's a proof point that we can build world-class companies. I don't think that's a proof point that we've yet built sort of a systematic way to succeed with that. We have not built the ecosystem that basically puts the flywheel in place, where we ensure that we're turning talent eventually into world-class moonshots. And if we look at where we are, as has been highlighted a number of times, we're doing well in terms of research. Especially during the past year, Finland has initiated an Ellis Institute. The first one was set up in Tübingen, the second one in Finland, with just a few professorships initially. Now the latest number from yesterday is 45 world-class PIs or professors that have been attracted, most of them from abroad, from leading universities in China, in Canada, Harvard, ETH, Cambridge, Oxford, and so forth. I don't think anyone actually expected this level of success when this initiative was initiated. And these are not just individual researchers, they are all research groups around strong professors. But we still have the same challenge. How do we turn this research excellence into commercial success? And that, I think, ultimately really is about ensuring that we have the moonshots. We have these world-class initiatives where these brightest minds want to spend their time. They want to work with the best researchers on the most challenging problems. And for a PhD student, which is a short-term job, or for a postdoc, which is a short-term job, you're always on a global labor market. So when you move to your next job, even though you've done your PhD here, it is by no means certain that you will stay in Finland. Now, if I may end with three short suggestions on what I think we should be doing. Aligned with Draghi, I think we have the talent, we have the data, we have the compute, we have the industrial base and so forth. So there's, potential. Are we making the right choices? Are we making the right decisions? One thing which I think everyone, including myself as an entrepreneur, but also so many other entrepreneurs in the room and other decision makers, also politicians and policymakers, can raise the ambition level. We are the happiest country, but we might also be complacent in that position. I do think we need to aim higher, take more risk. When you take risk, you might also fail. If we aren't sort of aiming high enough and risking risking of failure, then I don't think we're aiming for the moonshots that we should be aiming for. Single market and fragmentation, I will not repeat the challenges with that. But rather than just complaining about legislation and regulation, I think we should be doing all we can to concentrate. I think that was what was highlighted. We don't need a frontier AI lab in every single city in Europe or every single country even. We would just need one frontier AI lab in Europe, and to start with. And then ultimately building strong ecosystems, as I've highlighted. I do think we have to sort of ensure in all of these elements, so world-class talent, building the moonshots where they want to spend their time, and eventually then attracting capital to that. So in everything we are doing as politicians and policymakers, but also entrepreneurs and business leaders, I think we should ensure that we are basically contributing to the key ingredient to success, ensuring that talent is retained in this country and attracted to this country. With that, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. So, Professor, any thoughts on Peter's remarks?
No, I mean,
You're on the same page.
We are totally on the same page. Yeah. But I think we have a lot of assets. We have a lot of soft power, and Europe carries values. You see, I think what's important is that we want to become more innovative, because I mentioned the social model and the democracy, and we need to become more innovative to keep carrying these values. You see what I mean? Otherwise, they will decline worldwide. I think we have a worldwide responsibility to become more innovative, because we are the best hope for democracy and freedom, and to explain that innovation and social mobility and innovation and protection can be fully reconciled, and it's here that it's happening. And so it's so important that we succeed, and we have, my feeling a bit is that after the two world wars, the Europeans were kind of, we used to be in the 19th century, we were the absolute leaders. And with the two world wars, we get out of it a bit like the hangover. You see, I mean, and we were obsessed by having enough laws not to fight each other, especially France and Germany. So the way we designed Europe was to make sure we would have enough laws not to fight each other, not to kill each other. But we became too legalistic. We made Europe into a regulatory giant and a budgetary dwarf. And now we have to stop doing that. We have to say, no, we are promoting these values, and we need to make the investment. We have the talents, we have the soft power, and you know, let's take advantage now. You know, Trump is cutting basic research programs in vaccines, in all that. He's persecuting the poor president of Harvard, you know, who is an observant Jew, explaining that he's an anti-Semite. You know, I spent several, you know, Passover with him, Garber. You know, he's a wonderful guy. He's making the life of foreign students impossible. We have a fantastic opportunity to say, no, in Europe, that's not the way it will be, and to attract mind. Look, Yann Lequin coming back. All these guys want to. I'm sorry, I'm a bit long.
No. This is very
long
important.
Answer to a short question.
A wonderful wake-up call for us. I think you agree, but there's one question I think that you had in mind, and I could maybe ask from both of you. Professor, you have said that innovation requires a stable environment, and that instability is not good for long-term innovation. But however, the time what we are living now, Trump does this all the time, or somebody else.
There is a way out.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask, what is the way out from both of you? How to navigate in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, while there is stability, at the same time, you know, as I also alluded to, we are the happiest country in the world. However, then that is measured, but you know, the way it's been measured for 9 years in a row, that's where we've been. And you know, I think we, as has been highlighted, we have a trust-based society. You know, we have a basis which is not actually sort of, you know, represented by instability, but rather the opposite. And then at the same time, yes, we live in an external environment, in a world where we, you know, independent of whether we look to the east or to the west, there are instabilities, and now to the south as well. So, you know, that I think can be turned into an opportunity, into sort of an asset, in that there's sense of urgency. If you look at defense was highlighted, if you look at sort of defense innovation, we're actually extremely well positioned for that, for many different reasons.
And what is your solution for that?
My view is that I fully concur, and the stability will create ourselves. So first, we'll be very happy, but if we want to keep being very happy and to sustain our social model, we will need to become more innovative. Because if we don't become more innovative, we will lose employment massively. You know, electric cars, for example, in France, we have a big automobile industry, which is under huge threat by, you know, of imports of Chinese electric cars. So if we want to sustain our social model, we need to become more innovative. You see, it's not just for the luxury of being innovative. It's a way to secure, you know, our way of being, our values, our model, our social model. But also the good news also, I was in Davos for the first time in my life, and I was very taken by Mark Carney's speech, because Mark Carney said, well, you know, we're a set of countries with firm values, and we should work together. You see what I mean? We should create a new group of countries who believe in the same values, and maybe value chain will be remodeled. You know, resilience will become much more a criterion for value chain than cost minimization used to be, and we should work together and make sure that we maintain. We all face populist threats. In France, we have a big populist threat in 1 year. I will do everything I can to avoid, but I'm pretty optimistic we will avoid populists coming to Élysée Palace in 1 year. And we have to get, we are the core. And then we can do business with US, with China, with others. Of course, China, US is more of an ally still, but the core should be this set of countries that firmly believe in these values, that I mentioned before. And I think that's the new world, you see, that I see.
understand.
And
Yeah,
I know
just
we're running
briefly.
over time,
Yeah.
but let me just concretize that
Yeah,
because I
with a brief
yes,
example.
I really agree with that. And the brief example is automotive was an example. Yes. I mean, if we look at who is leading at the moment, we have some of the world's largest automotive companies, but who is leading in self-driving? It's actually big tech. If we look at life sciences, we have some of the world's largest life science companies in Europe. Who is leading in AI for life science? It's again big tech. It's Waymo and it's isomorphic labs. And if you look at gaming, for instance, we have in Europe still some of the world's largest gaming companies. If you look at who is leading in AI or basically generating world models, generating 3D models for games, it's again big tech. We have the industrial platforms. The question really is, are we doing the large R&D bets that it takes? It's a long-term R&D investment to build many of these technologies. They've been doing it for the past 10 plus years. And this is the bold bets we really need.
Very good point also. I'm happy that you added that. But now it's our time to thank you so much, Peter Sarlin. Let's give a big hand. Thank you. Thank you. We get another. Thank you. Oh, yo. We stay. We stay. Because there is another amazing comment on your speech and some more thoughts. Pia Santavirta is the CEO of Finnish Industry Investment Tesi. Pia oversees one of the state's key investment arms with the mandate to allocate up to 1.8 billion euros over the next 5 years to support growth and renewal in the Finnish economy. Let's give a big hand now to Pia. Pia Santavirta. Pia, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Okay, let's start. So, Professor Philippe Aghion and Petter Sarlin, thank you so much for your insightful contributions. And I fully agree with Petter and Aghion. Europe definitely can win, this is for sure. Accelerating growth requires decisive political and structural reforms, both in Europe and in Finland. Genuine single markets and a strong financing ecosystem are essential for competitiveness. And let's remember, Finland is best of all, right? You said that. Yep. And at the same time, as Peter emphasized, the biggest adjustment is actually still about ambition. I would like to add one more perspective to this discussion. Many Finnish startups and growth companies are full of ambition, but are we as ambitious as investors and owners? That's my question. We have seen great growth stories in recent years, like Oura, now valued already over $10 billion, IQM, Europe's leading quantum company, and then ICEYE, already collaborating with major defense actors across Europe, to name a few. These are powerful success stories. But when we talk about growth and success, we should also talk about who captures the value that is created. Finnish companies are conquering global markets, but the question is, who owns these companies? Right now, Finnish investors hold only 14% of ownership in these flagship companies, Oura, ICEYE, and IQM. Many companies have already raised the bar. They have shown courage and ambition, and now Finnish capital, meaning domestic investors and owners, must be able to grow alongside with our strongest companies. Because when we own growth companies, we build more than businesses. We build entire ecosystems. That means more decision-making power here in Finland, stronger capital markets, and greater economic resilience. Finland's growth story has accelerated faster than many expected. Just 10 years ago, 2016, Finnish startup raised 250 million euros in funding, and the largest funding round was only 34 million euros. That was a company from Tampere named M-Files. But today, the figures are already different in scale. Startup and growth companies are becoming a backbone of Finland's economy. They have created 50,000 new jobs, Their combined turnover exceeds already 12 billion euros, and startup funding has increased sixfold, with funding rounds scaling into to the hundreds of millions already. So I believe that growth opportunities are clearly in front of us. Yet Finnish investment and ownership are not keeping up. In Sweden, the importance of ownership was understood much earlier. Around half of startup and growth company funding comes from domestic capital. As a result, value creation, returns, expertise, and ownership largely stays in Sweden and accumulates over time. Today, Swedish growth companies are worth roughly 240 billion euros. Well, Finland's growth company market is already worth from 50 to 70 billion euros, and I would say that it could double faster than we even think. The question is whether we follow Sweden's path and ensure that the larger share of this value stays in Finland. But let me be very clear, this is definitely not an argument against international capital. Finland needs international investors, global expertise, networks, and ambition. They are truly essential. But international capital should complement, not replace, domestic ownership. So here's my core message. Value creation in the Finnish growth companies is accelerating really rapidly, but domestic ownership is not keeping up. Still, the good news is we still have a choice. In less than a decade, the number of scale-ups in Finland's startup ecosystem has grown. And with a new wave of large funding rounds ahead, the ownership structures in Finland's best companies will be decided next. The strengthening domestic ownership means three things, and I think that three things matters the most. First, we need larger Finnish venture capital and private equity funds to serve as the local anchor investor, combining deep local market insight with strong returns. Second, we need new scalable ways for Finnish institutional and professional investors to participate in the even largest scale-up rounds. And third, we need tax and regulatory framework that actively encourages long-term growth investments and international fundraising, so that companies and investors can compete on equal terms in Finland. Well, with these barriers removed, capital can flow where the growth is created faster than ever. When domestic investors collaborate at scale, growth just doesn't accelerate, it turns into ownership. That's how we become growth owners. And if we are serious about ownership, let me end with one final question. What if Finnish companies grew strong enough not just to attract buyers, but to become long-term owners and global consolidators themselves? I would love that. That would be perfect. Well, but to conclude, Finland's next chapter of success will not be written by growth alone, but by growth that we also own. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia. Thanks. Yes, Pia Santavirta thought that I can ask the follow-up. Maybe we can stand up because we will be taking shortly questions. But what do you think of the need of to stay as an owner, for being a long-time owner instead of like many Finnish companies, when they will start needing more capital, they will be sold?
So, you know, there is a kind of life cycle of firms. So firms usually you start growing, and at some moment, some firms remain family firms. In France, LVMH is Arnaud. You have Bouygues. So you have large companies in France that remain. But some of them are LBO'd at some moment. You say, well, so it's important to have a market, for corporate control. And some of them are M&A'd.
True.
That's the way it happens. So I had my lunch with Kurt Björklund,
Yes.
was telling me and said, well, you know, increasingly, it's true, LBO used to be a very popular way, and now increasingly M&A. But the problem is to make sure that the M&A is not stifling innovation. M&A can help innovation because you want to innovate to be M&A, but it's important to make sure that the M&A does not discourage innovation, does not lead to too large firms. I mentioned before the secular stagnation.
Yes.
You know, the superstar firm grew very large also by excessive M&A, and the M&A ended up stifling innovation. So we have this whole issue of how to make sure that how do you regulate merger and acquisition to make sure how you make a competition policy more dynamic. You don't just look at market share, market definition, but you make sure that M&A goes with data sharing. You insist on data sharing, and you make sure that innovation is not stifled. How you see that, and if you see that it is, you undo the M&A. So so we need to think very hard about how to make competition policy more dynamic. We have a colleague, Richard Gilbert, in Berkeley, and others who are thinking along those lines. But you need to let firms grow, and they grow in various ways. But it's not that you should prevent M&A or should prevent LBO, but make sure that they, again, that they don't stifle new entry and new innovation. It's always the same, conundrum that we have to manage.
So, dear guests and Professor, we do have some time for questions, not that many, but a few questions. And if I can be so kind and ask to have brief questions and brief answers, if that's possible. We will bring the mic for you, if you will then introduce yourselves and then ask the question. Maybe the gentleman here has been asking for the mic. You were the first one. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Professor. It was truly a passionate presentation. My name is Petri Salminen. I'm the chair of the Federation of Finnish Enterprises, representing small and medium-sized enterprises. But I also spent last 4 years as a president of European SME organization, SME United. And what puzzles me is because you rightfully criticized the big ones securing status quo, and also rightfully brought up the startups as a groundbreaking, innovative, disruptive new forerunners. But what puzzles me is that are we forgetting or taking for granted the vast majority of companies, the small and medium-sized enterprises, because only in Finland, if we get 1% more revenue to SMEs, that means 3 billion euros a year, or every 1%. So where do you see the SMEs in this landscape that you are describing?
Okay.
So I think it's important to let firms, new firms. We wait.
No, please. I'm doing something while you are explaining.
So I think it's important to let new innovators be able to set up firms. So venture capital, business angel, to be able to grow. And helping SMEs, it's crucial. I think Italy, for example, has a lot of SMEs in the northern part of Italy, and that kept Italy. Despite Meloni, they still survive. Voilà. But it's not thanks to Meloni, it's thanks to the fact that they have small and medium-sized enterprises in northern of Italy. So I think SMEs are crucial. And in France, the problem is that there were entire parts of France that disindustrialized and SMEs disappeared. And I think we lost enormously. So I think SMEs are a core part of maintaining a manufacturing sector. And the thing is to make sure that SMEs will become more innovative, to push innovation. It's not automatic that when you help SMEs, you help innovation per se. The European Innovation Council helps SMEs, which is a good thing, and we need them. But it's not enough to make sure that by itself guarantees innovation. So you may need both. You may need to support SMEs, but to support also innovation, and there may be an intersection. So I'm not saying either or. We need both in a sense. But it's not EIC. It's very interesting. It supported SMEs, and we needed EIC to support SMEs. So I'm not in favor of not having that. But that was not enough to boost frontier innovation. What boosted frontier innovation in France was these laboratoires d'excellence, these excellence laboratories, that in fact had a major impact on breakthrough innovation in industries, a lot of them were SMEs, in areas neighboring the laboratoire d'excellence. So it's the hubs that you need to have. You see, the hub between good universities and SMEs, and maybe there you can favor, you see, you can get the SMEs become more innovative. And so I think that's my take on SMEs and innovation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thanks for the question as well. And the next comment or question goes to Olli Rehn, Governor of the Bank of Finland.
Grand merci, Monsieur le Professeur.
Yeah.
And fully agree with your Schumpeterian philosophy of education, innovation, and democracy. But I would bring one element to your analysis and pose a question on that. And that's finance. How should we finance innovation in Europe? And you referred to the coalition of the willing, and that provides a possibility, I believe, in a sense that Europe must invest more in common defense that requires not only national but also European financing.
Exactly.
And thus we would need safe assets in Europe, which would also provide a way of paving the way for deep and liquid financial markets, and thus for channeling the 10 trillion euros of savings of Europeans to productive investment in Europe. So what is your policy advice in this regard, especially concerning how should we proceed as regards the European finance of innovation through this kind of coalition of able and willing?
Yeah. So it's a complicated question, because the big question is, why is it that we have so much savings in Europe? Why do the savings go to the US or China, but the US? It's also because you have more supply, a bigger supply of projects. So whatever you can do, single market, DARPA, whatever, you know, that would increase the supply of profitable projects. So, you know, partly the savings go there because it's there that you have the projects. But it's true that we also need instruments to help firms that want to grow in Europe to be able to grow in Europe. And that's where the venture capital and institutional investors are so important. I know that in Finland you are doing very well. Sweden managed to develop institutional investors despite the fact of not having a fully funded pension system, which is, I think, and I guess, I don't know the detail of Finland, but you do the same. So whatever you can do there will, of course, and a unified capital market, a more unified capital market for high tech at least. I mean, all those things will help, but it's more a supply and demand problem. You see, I mean, you need to have more prospect, single market. You need to make it more profitable for innovation to develop in Europe, so to have more projects, because if there are no projects, but of course the savings will go elsewhere. But you also need to have those instruments. For example, in France we have life insurance scheme, but the life insurance essentially goes into real estate, not enough into innovation project. Maybe there tax incentives can help also. You see what I mean? I don't know how your life insurance works, but in France there is not enough to induce life insurance to go into innovation. Maybe you could say if you go into more innovative projects, you pay less tax maybe than if you go into real estate. I don't know if that kind of thing, if you are facing similar problems. But it's both a demand and supply thing. You want to create an environment where there is more room for innovation, so more innovative projects are, but you want also to have these various instruments that will allow, so I don't know how well you are on institutional investors, on venture capital, on all those things that, you know, will help that if you have profitable projects, they will be financed in Europe. I've spent 20 years in the US, and I've seen a lot of Consul de France since I'm the ambassador in Boston. You know, they used to tell me my main job is to host French startups that cannot grow in France. They need to come here to grow. And that's what we need to, but possibly, You see, I mean, why is it that Pfizer needed to move, to the other side of the Atlantic to develop the RNA messenger vaccine? So that's why also the DARPA, all those things I mentioned will help have the, startups, European startups remain in Europe. But it's both sides, you see, I mean, the financial instruments and the opportunities to say, well, there is a market there, there is really profitability there. We have, for example, also bad ideas. I have a colleague called Zuckman, okay? He wants to introduce a crazy tax. He wants to tax on unrealized income. You are Mistral, you are valued at 12 billion euros, you don't have a single cent of cash flow, and if that tax was introduced, he should borrow to pay a tax on an income he has not realized. I know that Denmark is trying now to be seduced by, he's an adorable man, Zuckman. He really wonderful friend, I love him. But I said, I love you, but not your tax, please, don't do this tax, because you kill innovation. So it's just to make sure you don't take steps that will discourage breakthrough innovators, and it's both on the supply side and the demand side, I think, that you will need to, that will guarantee the, the central bank, of course, well, when you will face more inflation, you have to maintain high interest rate. Of course, it's good to do it right away to send a good signal, but too high interest rate for too long, of course, do not help, of course. But you have to face an inflationary problem. You need to do what you need to do collectively, but do it fast and make sure that otherwise you maintain a friendly environment for new investments and innovative investments.
Professor Aghion, you've been our special guest today and keynote speaker, and I'd like to conclude with a more or less a little bit personal question. I'm sure maybe some already know this, that your mother founded the French fashion house Chloe.
Yeah, but that's not Chloe.
This is not either, no, but this is, yeah. And,
you might have noticed.
And I think it's, you said in one interview that the reason why you never learned German to speak or German is because Karl Lagerfeld did your German homework.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. This is not only his fault. Yeah.
And also that your father sparked a political awakening in your upgrowing.
Yeah.
So, what would you say that how have these influences played a role in your thinking and in your career?
It's several things. First, there were innovators in their own way. So she created ready-to-wear. I mean, before it was haute couture, and she created the ready-to-wear. Voilà. So she was an innovator. My father wanted to do a social revolution in Egypt. So she succeeded, he failed. Okay, so, but I learned also failure is also very bad. But he was also with surrealist painters. He was surrounded by surrealist writers and painters. So I was very much, I grew up in a world of inventors in a sense. So that has. But also the politics, I got into economics through politics. I wanted to improve the world, to make the world a better place. And a lot of, I was okay in math and I was socially motivated. And I think that what made me an economist is this mixture of math training and social motivation. I wanted to poverty, I was obsessed with poverty. I wanted to get the world out of poverty. That's why I went into growth economics, because I wanted to contribute to get countries out of poverty. And I think probably it's that mixture that, that maybe partly influenced me, I guess. Well, that's and I learned about that failing is very important. You should be able to. I failed many things in life. I've just to tell you a story. My dream at Harvard was to be Society of Fellows. It's a first-class postdoc. When you are in Harvard, you want to be Society of Fellows. And I took the exam and I failed it. It was Bob Solo who told me at dinner time, you didn't understand the question that was asked to you. And I didn't go there. So I went to MIT, which is not the first fallback that you can imagine. But I met Howitt there. And I asked myself, my God, had I succeeded the Society of Fellows, I would not be here today. So failure is extremely important. If you know how to use your failures, you can. And I failed many other things. So I encourage people to try and fail and make the best of their failures.
Wonderful. Wow. Yes, let's fail. Professor, it's been an honor to moderate an event where you are the keynote speaker, and we are also delighted to have you here. We wish you all the best, of course, and,
Thank you.
and we hope to see you soon in Finland again.
It
And
will
dear
be a
guests,
pleasure.
thank
Great
you.
country.
Oh, that's so
Thank
nice
you.
to hear. And thank you also for Pia and Peter, and to wonderful guests. Thank you for joining us today, and all the best to you too. Thanks. Oh.